The events you're about to see are based on real accounts. To protect the identities of those involved, names and details have been changed. My name is Jack. I'm 38 years old, and I live in New Jersey, near New York. This happened just before September 11, 2001. I know people have their theories about this kind of thing, but what happened to me is something I can't explain logically. No matter how much I try, I still can't forget it. And believe me, it's something that never left my mind. That week felt strange from the start. I can't quite explain it, but there was something in the air. Something that made me feel tense for no apparent reason. I was working in downtown Manhattan at the time, so the hustle and bustle of the city were part of the routine. But in early September, things felt different. The atmosphere was heavier. People on the street seemed more distracted, with a strange anxiety I could almost subconsciously sense. It was like I could feel that something big and bad was about to happen. And no, it wasn't just a feeling of, oh, something might go wrong. It was deeper, almost like a premonition. Throughout the week, I woke up with a sense of suffocation, like the air was denser and harder to breathe. I spent the night of September 10 tossing and turning in bed, unable to sleep properly, and September 11 was the climax of that anxiety. That morning, as usual, I took the train to work, but for the first time I felt uneasy. I couldn't focus on anything. Even the sound of the train station seemed irritating, as if it was amplified. At the office, everything seemed normal, but I just couldn't concentrate on what I was doing. I was distracted, waiting for something to happen, but I didn't know what. It was a sense of impending disaster. I tried to ignore it. After all, I knew everything was fine, that nothing was wrong, but the feeling only grew stronger. Then in the middle of the morning, someone in my office said that there had been a collision with an airplane. Everyone in the room stood up to watch the images. That's when I saw it. The first tower of the World Trade Center was already on fire. At that moment, something inside me snapped. It was as if the anxiety I had been feeling, the sense that something was about to happen, had materialized right in front of me. My heart started racing. I didn't know what to do, how to react. It was like my body already knew what was happening before my mind processed the information. I felt a cold chill, but my face was hot with sweat. I was paralyzed. The sense that something was happening, something terrible, felt even stronger as we watched the tragedy unfold. What disturbed me more was that at no point was I surprised. I didn't go into shock like everyone else. I just knew this was going to happen. I don't understand to this day why or how I knew. It was like I was in sync with some kind of collective feeling, like my body was reacting to it in a way my mind couldn't comprehend. After the chaos of those first hours, I still managed to take the train back home. The city was in a state of panic, everyone trying to reach someone while fear hung in the air. And I just felt more lost, as if somehow all of this was my fault, even though I hadn't done anything. I knew the towers had fallen, that thousands of lives had been lost, and the only thing that unsettled me was that strange feeling that, in some way, I already knew. The next day, still not fully believing what had happened, I searched for something on the internet. I didn't know why, but I felt a need to understand. So I looked for reports, searching for more people who might have experienced something similar. That's when I came across some posts on forums and websites talking about dreams or strange feelings that occurred before September 11. I wasn't alone. People talked about vivid dreams, of airplanes crashing into buildings, or of an inexplicable fear that overtook them. Some said they felt that something terrible was about to happen, without being able to pinpoint what it was, just like I had. The connection was immediate, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't know if I should feel relieved that I wasn't the only one, or if it made everything even more disturbing. I don't know what that was. I don't know what caused that feeling I would call a kind of collective premonition. Was it something we all in some way felt, or was it a warning my mind received in a way I couldn't understand at the time? I'll never know. But I can tell you one thing. September 11 wasn't just a historical event for me. It was something that messed with my head in a way I still try to understand. That feeling never repeated itself for me in the same way, but even today, every time I get anxious for no reason, I think back to that time. And I wonder if there will be something else in the future that I can't see, but somehow I already feel it. My name is Ethan Brooks. I'm 43 years old and I live in Boston, Massachusetts. It's been 19 years since that tragic day, September 11th, 2001, and even today, I can't forget what happened in the following weeks. I was at home with my wife when we learned about the attacks, but what happened to me after that? Well, that's what still haunts me. I'll tell you everything that happened, because the feeling of fear and the uncertainty of not knowing what was real still follow me to this day. I wasn't in the city that day, but my brother was. He worked in Manhattan and used to take Flight 11 of American Airlines, which ended up being hijacked and heading toward the North Tower of the World Trade Center. I always knew he was on that flight, but the worst was yet to come. I had already lost a brother, and when the news came, it felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But what happened after that? It was as if the world had taken a much darker turn, a turn I didn't expect, something I can't explain to this day. After that day, everything felt like a blur, a mix of emotions I didn't know how to process. Sadness was a constant, but there was also this strange feeling that something was going on, a sensation that I wasn't alone in my grief. During the first week, everything was a haze of funerals and communication with family members. It all seemed surreal. And then, it was in the second week that things really started to get strange. It was a normal night, or at least I tried to make it seem that way. I was at home with my wife, getting ready for bed when the phone rang. It was an unknown number, something that didn't sound familiar, and on a whim, I picked up the phone. I honestly don't know why. Maybe something just drew my attention at that moment. Normally, I wouldn't answer calls from numbers I didn't know, but that day, something made me pick it up. And as soon as I put the receiver to my ear, everything started to feel different. There was static, like the line was being cut or poorly connected, and it was then that I heard something, or rather someone. The voice was distant, as if it was on the other side of a large crowd, and the sound was muffled, but it was clearly someone trying to speak to me. I remember my first reaction was to look for some sort of logical explanation, but as the voice got clearer, I began to realize that it wasn't something normal. The voice seemed to be calling my name. It was so faint, so far away, that it was hard to understand what was being said. The static interfered with the sound, making the communication even more confusing. I tried to speak, but the voice quickly disappeared, and the line went silent for a moment. I couldn't make sense of what had just happened, but something inside me knew that it was wrong. It wasn't normal. The phone then hung up on its own. I stood there, frozen, trying to understand what had just happened. The feeling I had was like a weight on my chest. Something was happening, something I couldn't explain, and fear began to settle in. My wife was by my side and she heard it too, but we didn't really talk much about it at the time. We were both too confused, and I, although I wanted to speak, just couldn't find the words. In the following days, the calls kept coming. Sometimes they happened at night, other times during the day, but always from the same unknown number. Every time I answered, I heard the same static and then a voice calling my name. On some occasions, it seemed like there was more than one person on the line, as if I was hearing fragments of conversations, but always so distant that I could barely make sense of them. But what troubled me even more was the feeling that it was someone I knew, someone trying to communicate with me. The second time this happened, the voice seemed clearer. It was almost like I could hear full words, but they were mixed with a buzzing sound, as if the communication was being hindered somehow. I tried to understand. I tried to connect the words, but I couldn't. The voice seemed to say, "I'm here," and then it faded into the static. I didn't know what to do. I was in shock. It was impossible to believe what was happening. I started to think maybe it was some sort of technical glitch, maybe a wrong number, but when the calls kept coming, I began to wonder if this wasn't supernatural. I began searching for explanations, and the more I searched, the more I came across similar stories. I remember researching online, and then information about this type of phenomenon started to surface. Reports of people who had lost loved ones in the attacks and had also started receiving calls from unknown numbers with voices that seemed to try to communicate in some way. It wasn't just me. Other family members were going through the same thing. And then the fear intensified. I was beginning to understand that maybe what I was hearing was real. And at the same time, I felt like I was being driven mad. How could this be happening? How could it be possible? I tried to rationalize it. I looked for a logical explanation, but the more I searched, the deeper the mystery became. The calls kept coming for days, and the feeling of disconnection from reality only grew. During one of the last calls, I clearly heard a word that sounded very much like help. It was almost inaudible, but it was there, in the middle of all that static. I knew I was hearing something real, something that couldn't just be ignored. It was at that moment that I, for the first time, began to believe that maybe what was happening wasn't a mistake, but a sign. A sign that my brother was trying to reach out in some way, that he was lost, and maybe death had only been the beginning of a communication he couldn't complete. After that call, the calls stopped. One day, the phone simply didn't ring anymore. It was as if something had suddenly faded away. The unknown number never showed up again, and I never received another call like that. For weeks, I waited. I was obsessed, waiting for the phone to ring again, but it never did. The emptiness in my chest only grew. I tried to get back to my life. I tried to move on, but that experience stayed with me. Something told me that those calls were important, that there was something more happening than our eyes could see. But at the same time, there was a part of me that wanted to forget, that wanted to move on without these unanswered questions. I never knew what those calls meant. I never knew exactly what was trying to be said. Today, 19 years later, what scares me the most isn't what happened, but what we'll never know. We'll never know why that happened. The unknown number never showed up again, and the calls never came, and I never heard my brother's voice again. But in some way, even today, when the phone rings, my heart races, and for a moment I find myself waiting for that static to return. Maybe one day I'll understand what happened, or maybe I'll never understand. But the fact that there was a moment when I felt a connection with him again, even in such a strange way, that still haunts me to this day. My name is Richard. I am 43 years old, and I live in an apartment in downtown Atlanta, Georgia. I want to tell you something that happened to me, something that haunts me to this day. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear on everything sacred that it was real. It all started about 4 months ago, at the end of a winter afternoon. I was home alone, as I often was. My job required me to spend long hours at home. The night fell early, as it often does at this time of year, and I was already sitting on my couch, watching something on TV. I'm not one to pay too much attention to what happens around me, but that night, something felt strange. The atmosphere seemed different. I couldn't pinpoint what it was, but I could feel that something was out of place. At first, I noticed a shadow passing by the wall, but when I looked to the side, there was no one there. I thought it might just be my imagination, so I went back to focusing on the TV. However, a few minutes later, the shadow appeared again, this time larger, projected onto the wall as if it were a person. I froze immediately, but I tried to convince myself that it was just a reflection of something, maybe the streetlight coming through the window. But when I turned to look, there was nothing. The feeling of unease grew, but I tried to ignore it. At first, I thought it was just an illusion, but soon the shadows began to appear more frequently. The problem was that, as this happened, I felt a heavy sadness, as if a profound loss was surrounding me. It wasn't just fear. It was a feeling of mourning, something deep and uncomfortable. I was so unsettled that I decided to go outside to get some fresh air, trying to shake the thought that maybe I was losing my mind. I walked around the neighborhood for a while, aimlessly, trying to escape that feeling of dread. When I returned to my apartment, everything seemed calm again, but the oppressive feeling was still there. It was as if something was watching me, observing me from somewhere. I didn't know what to do, so I tried to distract myself with a book, but every page I turned, that shadow seemed more real. It appeared on the wall, at specific points in the apartment, without me seeing it in the space, only on the walls. It was like my field of vision was being manipulated. In the following days, I began to notice that it wasn't just me. Neighbors nearby started to report the same type of thing. They saw human shadows projected on their apartment walls, even when they were alone, with no visible reason for it. I knew I wasn't crazy. Others were seeing the same things. The most disturbing part was the feeling of sadness that accompanied these visions. It was as if, no matter how much we tried to push them away, an invisible grief hung in the air. I spoke with some of my closer neighbors, and they all seemed to share a similar sensation, something that made it even stranger. I tried to search for an explanation, any reason that would make sense. I read about shadow phenomena, reflections, but nothing quite matched what I was experiencing. Until one day, a neighbor told me that, when trying to investigate the shadows, he felt a heavy pressure on his chest, as though something invisible was pushing him. He didn't want to talk about it anymore after that, but he told me that, one night, he saw one of the shadows move, as if it had a life of its own. At first, I thought he was exaggerating, but the tone of his voice made me think he really believed what he was saying. I became even more scared, but I tried to continue with my routine. The problem was I couldn't do it peacefully anymore. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling the presence of shadows around me, even though I knew there was nothing there. It was as if I was being watched, judged, and at the same time, a profound sadness filled me. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Even during the day, the pressure was almost unbearable. One night I was trying to sleep when I woke up with a strange feeling. I can't explain it, but it was as if I was being pulled out of my body. It felt like my physical body was there, but my mind was somewhere else, watching everything from a distance. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My vision was blurred, and the shadows were there again, projected on the walls, subtly moving. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. The feeling of helplessness was terrifying. I couldn't escape that state of fear anymore. I decided to talk to a trusted friend, but he didn't take it seriously. He said I was probably just stressed, that it could be caused by my exhausting routine, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. This wasn't normal. It wasn't a reasonable explanation. The shadows were becoming more intense, and the feeling of sadness only grew. I started to feel like I was living through a tragedy, as if I was being dragged by an event I couldn't avoid. In the end, it all just stopped. I woke up one morning, and when I looked at the walls, I didn't see anything. No shadow. Nothing. It was as if it had never happened. I tried to rationalize it, but the feeling that something inexplicable had happened that night wouldn't let me go. The sadness I felt during those days still haunts me, as if part of me had been sucked into something I could never understand. Some neighbors said the shadows never disappeared for them. They still feel that sense of loss, as if something is left hanging, something unresolved. Some moved away, others tried to ignore it, but whenever the conversation comes up, they all have a blank expression, as if they were trying to block something from memory. I never knew exactly what happened in that building. I don't know why the shadows appeared, but I feel like they're still there, waiting, lurking. Maybe I'll never find out the truth. I could never look at the walls the same way again, and even today, in moments of absolute silence, I feel a chill running down my spine. And even though everything's stopped, something inside me is still disturbed. I don't know what happened in that building. I don't know why the shadows appeared, but I feel like they're still there, waiting, lurking. Maybe I'll never find out the truth. My name is Thomas Graham, and I'm 45 years old. I live in Detroit, Michigan, and almost 15 years ago, a strange experience that still chills me to the bone changed my life forever. I've never spoken about it to anyone, except for a few close friends, but now I feel like I need to share this story in a place where people can truly understand what happened to me, because, honestly, I still don't know what to think. It was a normal workday morning, and I was heading to my security job in a commercial building here in the city. The routine was quiet until something out of the ordinary happened. It was the start of a rainy, overcast week, typical for Detroit, but it wasn't the storm that made me uneasy. There was something about the energy of that day that felt wrong, like the air was heavier, filled with some invisible tension. I usually take the train to work, and that day, something made me feel uncomfortable the moment I entered the station. I can't explain it, but I felt like I was being watched. Something in my gut told me I shouldn't be there, but I kept going, trying to ignore that feeling. When I got to the building, the atmosphere felt strange. The usual hustle and bustle of people coming and going was more subdued, and the air inside the building had a tense vibration, as if something was about to happen. I wasn't alone. Some of my co-workers were there, doing the usual security rounds, but they were so absorbed in their tasks that they hardly noticed my unease. I didn't dwell on it, but the feeling stuck with me. I headed to my booth and started my shift as usual. The morning went by normally until around 2 p.m, when something unexpected happened. I was called to check out a strange noise coming from the upper floor. At that point, the elevator was out of order, so I decided to take the stairs. The lights were dim, and the feeling of being followed was overwhelming. I looked behind me several times, but there was no one there. When I reached the top floor, the office door was open. Apparently it was just a broken window, but what caught my attention was the smell. Something metallic, almost like something had been burned. I walked in, and immediately something didn't feel right. The room was empty, but the sensation that I wasn't alone was suffocating. Something was off. That's when I noticed something strange. The lights started flickering. It wasn't just the usual wiring problems, but an irregular rhythm, like the electricity was being manipulated in some way. I knew I should leave, but something kept me there. Then I heard it. A whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound was unmistakable. It was like someone was trying to communicate with me, but in a language I couldn't understand. I looked around, but the room was empty. The whisper turned into something more. A persistent noise coming from within the wall. Not knowing what else to do, I decided to leave, but when I turned to exit, I realized the doors were locked, as if someone had locked them from the outside. I panicked, trying to pull at the doors, but they were stuck. That sound, now it was clearer. It was like it was coming from a corner of the room, from the floor where the wall met the ground. I cautiously approached, and that's when I saw something I can't explain. In the corner of the room where the walls met, there was a shadow. Not just any shadow, but something. Alive. It looked human, but it was blurry, like it was made of smoke or a thick mist. I took a step back, my heart pounding. The feeling of being watched intensified, and then the lights went out completely. The building was in total darkness, and I was alone on that floor. That's when I realized something was terribly wrong. The sound of breathing mixed with my own panic, and I could barely think straight. A feeling of urgency overtook me. I didn't know what it was, but I felt like I had to get out of there as fast as I could. I ran down the stairs, and as I descended, the feeling that something was behind me grew stronger. Fear became physical, palpable, like my skin was reacting to some imminent danger. When I finally reached the ground floor, the sense of relief was brief, but I knew that something was still following me. As I stepped outside onto the street, a cold breeze wrapped around me, and the sky had darkened, as if the day had been consumed by night without me noticing. I was out of the building, but the feeling that whatever it was still watching me didn't go away. In the days that followed, things got stranger. I started having nightmares about that place, about the shadow in the wall. Every time I closed my eyes, I would hear the whisper, and the feeling of being watched came back, more intense than ever. I even tried searching for an explanation for what happened, but everything seemed in vain. The building, after a while, was closed for maintenance, and I never heard anything more about it. I tried researching online, but there were no records of strange incidents in that place, as if everything had been erased. However, the experience didn't let me go. Every time I passed by that building, I felt the gaze of that presence, something that watched me from the shadows, waiting. An indescribable feeling that somehow that thing was still there, even though I couldn't see it. I tried to move on, but the fear never fully left me. Everything seemed to stop suddenly, like an event that happens and then disappears without explanation, but I know what I lived through. To this day, when I pass by that building, something stirs inside me and I can't help but wonder, what happened there? What did I see? And most importantly, what is still waiting? If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like to support the community. And if you're not subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new content. See you next time.